What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on groundbreaking healthcare innovations. I'm your host, Jeremy Schrand, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive deep into the stories behind medical advancements, featuring insights from global therapeutic experts who are literally changing how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're highlighting the human stories driving medical progress. On this episode of Moving Medicine Forward, Shawna Bredek brings her 20-plus years of experience to talk about feasibility and transplantation clinical trials, and how her team helps our sponsors conduct this life-saving research. Welcome to the podcast, Shawna. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about feasibility. So tell us about feasibility in the context of a clinical trial.
Sure. Yeah, it's my favorite topic. So feasibility really is a process, right, or an assessment that we can conduct for our sponsors very early in a trial startup phase. And really the entire purpose of it is to look at the site staff, right? Look at the PI. And can they really carry out and execute the protocol as planned? And really the goal of it is to deliver the best sites, and doing that through a thorough assessment to really reduce the risk and save time in the end, and money as well. That's important. And ultimately avoid a trial failure of some sort because the site didn't produce like they were supposed to, or they had bad quality, could be another example. And, the selection of the site is the key to success ultimately in the end for our feasibility process for CTI, but also our sponsors, so that we, deliver the trial the way the sponsor had intended it, and that, we meet all of our goals and expectations.
Awesome. So when you have like super complex clinical trials, like around like transplant studies and other studies, what are some of the difficult challenges that arise, especially those transplant studies? And then how does CTI take on those challenges?
Great question. So I will say, since COVID, feasibility, site selection, identification, all those things have really, it's been more difficult, right? It's difficult to find sites that check all the boxes, so to speak. We have more sites that when we reach out, they say, I'm really interested in the study, but I just can't do it right now. It could be because of resourcing constraints, or they can't commit to the timelines that we're looking for. And what that's all kind of coming out of is the funding. Funding for research staff was cut dramatically during COVID, but also even still post-COVID. It's not really recovered yet, especially at administrative overhead level at the sites that we work with. So I feel like these sort of constraints have stressed the system a little bit, and they're still struggling with that, 5 years later, which has caused some challenges. But I think our job really is to educate the sponsors about those constraints. Ultimately, it really is that, do we forego something on that sort of checklist that we have for expedited timelines, or not? And those are decisions we have to make early. I think it's a fine balance that we have to walk really between the recruitment potentials of these sites and how fast they can kind of move through their internal process. So we just, really continue to address the challenges that we have and focus on ensuring that we're asking the right questions of the sites up front, and finding, the right ways to work with our sponsors and follow through on all those timelines.
Awesome. So let's talk about the process a little bit. How do you approach site selection in a transplant clinical trial? And what are the most important factors when you are looking for these sites?
I think most of the time, it really starts with what we've discovered during that feasibility process, because we ask a lot of questions, right? A lot of pointed questions, difficult questions. And the goal of that is to really make the sites think about, all aspects of the protocol. Can they do it from a resource perspective? What are the expectations from the timelines? Do I have to have weekend coverage? I mean, there's a lot of things that sites have to consider when they're thinking about a study. So we really try to ask some really pointed questions and make them think about their standard of care, for example. It may be different than what we're asking in the protocol. How do they cover holidays? Because, for example, transplants happen all hours of the day, weekends, holidays, those kind of things. So we want them to make sure that they do a really good assessment and come back to us with a yes or no answer, whether they can execute. So I think it's, a combination of things, but really trying to get down to what are the key elements that are going to be the challenge, present it to the sponsor, and then make an educated decision collaboratively together whether we move forward or not. So.
How do regulatory challenges affect this process in the clinical in transplant clinical trials, and how can the process be simplified to help get over those challenges?
I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, challenges are in different levels. I kind of put them in tiers. So as far as site challenges themselves from a regulatory perspective, we really haven't seen, too many challenges at the site level from a regulatory perspective. But more at the country level approvals, right? And some of those challenges, I think, have been some of the biggest challenges for our sponsors, because what's happened is the regulatory agencies review a potential protocol, let's say, and they'll come back and really ask for a lot of things that weren't contemplated in the beginning, additional testing. It could be you need more preclinical data, all those kind of things. And what that does is it delays the life cycle of the trial, right? We've had studies have to go on a hold 6 months, 9 months, a year to do some of that work. And when you talk to industry leaders, they say sometimes the agencies are using outdated guidance or a definition that they think may have been okay 20 years ago is totally different than what it is now. So those are some, I think, the biggest challenges we've seen here lately is more at the regulatory bodies, the FDA, the EMA levels, and not really at the site level. And, all we do is try to navigate the sponsors through that and do as much as we can during the holds and, then get back on track as soon as possible. But I will say with maybe some of the recent changes, with a new legislature in play, new staff involved with managing at the FDA, we may see some changes. That might benefit our clients. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
We had Dr. Tedesco from Sao Paulo on a previous episode. He's really great. But it's really interesting hearing the differences. Like him and Dr. Boschkos were talking about all the differences between like how they do it there versus what we do in the States and stuff. And it was just kind of interesting hearing that insight. And it's like, oh, it's a whole different ball game down there. Yeah.
Tedesco's a great guy. He's been, working with us for such a long time with CTI. So, and he's a thought leader in transplant globally. So, he has a little bit of influence.
Yes. So how does your team find patients for rare diseases when the affected population is so limited? I know that can be very challenging.
Yeah, it can be very challenging. Sometimes we have a joke internally with it's trying to find that needle in a very large haystack, right? But I the bottom line is we use our resources. Doing this 25 years plus now, we have a lot of contacts, right? Investigators that I worked with when I was in the field as a CRA are still in practice. There are key guys and gals that we go to. So using those resources, and I think, at CTI, we pride ourselves on like building relationships, right? Because relationships are important in the end, and we've done that since day one. And I think they know that if we're sending them information, it's important, and they need to respond to us and engage with us because they know that something we're presenting to them is very exciting. So I think The focus and continued focus on relationships helps us find the right individuals at the sites, and using those relationships to help us find those relationships we may not have because they want to help us, right? Um, but yeah, I just think, building those strong connections, the trust that we have, even with patient advocacy groups.
Yeah.
We've had a few patient advocacy groups come in and speak to our staff recently, and the amount of encouragement that they have with the patients is huge. And if we can get a patient advocacy group involved and help us, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the patients, but it's also a win for the sponsors.
Yeah,
so.
it's super inspiring when we have those advocacy groups come in. It really makes it easy to get up and come to work every day.
Definitely.
But you've been involved with transplant research a long time.
A long time. I don't want to show my age.
Yeah.
A long time.
But
yes.
Okay, well, this might show your age a little bit. Can you tell us about your experience working on one of the first major transplant drugs to be approved?
Yeah, very exciting. My CTI journey started, coming up 23 years. And as I mentioned before, I started out as the CRA, going out to the sites, traveling and seeing, being with the investigators, being with the site staff, kind of monitoring all of that data, right? It really provided a good foundation, and taking a look at it from the patient side of things too, because when you're out in the field looking at the data, you see the patient information right there in the medical record, and you see some of the decisions that had to be made. We've worked with almost every transplant approved drug on the market, right? So it's life-changing, in my opinion, to be able to contribute to the successful approval of any drug, but, especially transplant for me.
Yeah.
It's really a passion of mine. And it's where you get to experience sort of the joy side of seeing someone get transplanted, but on the back end of that somebody is really making a life-changing, altering, sad decision for someone else to kind of live on in their memory. But I think, together, sort of all of us, right? The CTI, our sponsors, the site staff, and the patients, I think, who really participate in our research, right? In our transplant research, we're all moving medicine forward together. And I love that about what we do.
Shawna, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy discovering how medicine is moving forward, or you are interested in how CTI could help you with clinical research, be sure to subscribe. Follow us on social media or visit our website at ctifacts.com.